Hello, everyone, and welcome to our final Q&A session before the RA application goes live. My name is Haley Handel, and I'm the coordinator for selection and leadership with the UCF Department of Housing and Residence Life.
And my name is Tanner, and I'm the graduate coordinator for student staff selection.
We're so excited to be here with you all today, as I mentioned, for our very last Q&A that will be happening before the application. We especially want to thank you all for joining us today with the announcement of Hurricane Ian making landfall this week. We know that this is a very busy time. And with that, we wanted to make sure that everyone was aware of our updated timeline that we've made. So all of the candidates and references should have received an email from us today regarding this change, but just to make sure that it's noted publicly and live, we have changed the deadline for our application. Instead of October 1st at 11:59, we've extended it to October 2nd at 11:59. And same thing for the reference form due date. Instead of it being due on October 2nd at 11:59, it's now going to be due on Monday, October 3rd at 11:59. Sorry, there's a lot of numbers and a lot of words. That's mainly for, one, our residents who are having to either leave campus or prepare for the hurricane to be able to have some extra time to finish their application, and additionally for our faculty, staff, and other community members who may be in Florida to be able to have another day potentially back in the office on Monday to be able to complete these forms, since for many of us, we're in a couple days. So we wanted to make sure that everyone had the opportunity to be able to finish this form and not have it be severely impacted by Hurricane Ian. With that, we also, in that email out earlier, offered individuals to put questions in early if they weren't able to attend this session live. But I encourage you all, if you have any questions now, to go ahead and start putting them in the comments, either on Facebook or YouTube. We'll be able to see them and answer them live. But we're going to kick it off with some of our pre-submitted questions. So our first question is, after the application deadline, are we going to receive our interview date, or should we already have received it?
I'm going to go ahead and answer this one. So that's a great question. You shouldn't have already received it. Our application is still open, and so we have not begun to review all of our applicants. We will start that process after our October 2nd deadline, meaning that we will be reaching out to applicants with an offer for an interview on October 24th, and then you will have until October 27th to sign up for a time. Our interviews will also be taking place between November 1st and November 3rd.
Yeah, so make sure you're watching your emails on October 24th, excuse me, thank you. Yes, 24th. All right, so our next question is, how many spots exactly are available for the spring term? So for the spring term, really for every term, we're never really 100% sure, right? People always end up either graduating early or maybe having to postpone their graduation. Maybe they've been offered an internship or have to take an internship course the next semester, and their leave of the RE position is kind of fluid and kind of changes plans here and there. So we never really know. But what we can say is spring, we hire very few positions, usually just around 10 or 15 positions. So very few, not that many. So don't be discouraged if you're not selected for a spring position, because again, most positions are not starting for the spring, and that would be starting in January of 2023. All right, so for the next question, Tanner, what are the characteristics of someone who would succeed in this role?
That's a great question. I hate to say it, but it does range a lot. We're going to find different applicants have a lot of differing characteristics that are going to help them succeed. I would say, just to name a few, time management, dedication, resiliency, attitude towards the job is super important, especially when you're in times. I think right now is a great example of that. When you're in a time where everything is unexpected and there's a hurricane headed towards you and such, you're going to have to be able to move on your toes and expect changes within your job responsibilities. So adaptability is really good too. So just to name a few, I would say those.
Thank you. All right, and our next question.
All right, so what's the most important thing I could do to help within the first 90 days of employment?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And when I saw it pre-submitted, I actually reached out to our residence life coordinators. So those are going to be the full-time staff that supervise RAs. And I wanted to get their opinion. And one had a really, really great answer that I'm going to read out as the answer for this question. So they said, know all their residents by at least name and face and have a conversation with each resident so they know who they are and how they can support them and what their role is. So that's the best advice I think that you could give for that first 90 days is really just start getting to know your residents. Take those extra steps to put your face out there and your name out there and then start getting to know them by face and name so that they can make sure that they remember that they're part of a community here. All right, we only have a couple more pre-submitted questions, so make sure that you're putting your questions in the comments. All right, so Tanner, the next question is, can you have a pet as an RA?
So this is a good question. You can have a registered support animal or emotional support animal. Those would a service animal or an emotional support animal. Those would be have to be approved in the same process that all of our residents are going through, approving through our housing administration, paperwork, just that kind of thing. But yes, there are additional policies on that. I do not know all the specifics. I would recommend looking through your community living guideline. I know that it's specific to like what kind of pet and things like that.
Yeah, all RAs follow the same community living guide as current residents. All right, so do RAs make an hourly rate? This is a good question because while most positions do, the RA position does not have an hourly rate. It's actually a stipend amount, so you get paid the same amount bi-weekly, every other week, continuously throughout the year, so as long as you're working. So we do this because there are going to be some weeks like move-in where you're going to be working quite a few hours, and then there may be some weeks that you're not doing so much. Maybe you just have your weekly staff meeting and a one-on-one. And that's really all you're doing. You don't have any duty shifts or anything. We don't want it to where there's one week you're getting paid lots of money and then another week where you're getting paid like $50 and you're having to try to navigate life with a fluctuating paycheck. So instead, we say that you are going to be working at an average of 15, 20 hours a week, and we expect that there are going to be some weeks that are closer to that 20 and some weeks that are going to be less than that 15. So we expect that that time's going to range, but we want to make sure you're getting a consistent and same paycheck. All right, so we are moving on to our submitted comments. So make sure that if you have any questions to ask us, go ahead and put them in the Facebook or the YouTube comments. And we'll go ahead with our first one.
So Jordan has asked, what are some of your daily, weekly, monthly tasks? Great question. It does depend on the day, I will say. So let's start off with daily. So for instance, if you are working duty on this day, that would be reporting to the office from 5 to 8 p.m. That would be lockouts, you're doing rounds, you're assisting residents with access to the kitchen, walking them through how to submit a work order, things like that. Weekly, you are going to have a staff meeting every week. So that is a 2-hour meeting that takes place usually in the evenings when everybody is available to meet with your community. You're meeting with, not your community, the rest of the RAs in your community and your coordinator or graduate coordinator. Those kind of things you'd be going over, like some of those monthly tasks I'm about to talk about. So monthly tasks are things like your community meetings. That could be intentional conversations or community engagement events. So intentional conversations are one-on-one conversations with your residents. You do log those conversations just so you can like keep yourself accountable to having those conversations often. You're keeping in touch with your residents, asking them how they're doing, what's going on in their lives, and things like that. And then things like your community meetings, you're going over, you get a lesson plan from our department, and then you're going to go over that lesson plan. Maybe that month is a meeting about opening. You're talking about the community living guideline. Maybe that month is about stress reduction. You're talking about different kind of ways to de-stress. So yeah, I hope that answers your question, Jordan.
All right, now our next question is from Sock Cruz Flores. If we apply now, would we be able to use our initial application and use it to reapply should we not get the position this time around? Well, I will start with saying that we do not compare year-to-year applications. So if you were to use the same application, we wouldn't know. But my next kind of caveat to that would be if you didn't get invited to the interview round this round, you may want to change your application. So after we do our app reviews, we decide from that point who we're going to be moving on and asking to interview with us. So if you don't get asked to interview, I would then suggest probably changing some things around in your application to try to, jazz it up a little bit and get you a better chance to be brought to interviews. If you get through the interview round and then aren't offered a position initially, you again can still use the same application as well. But when we hire, we do combine your scores between your application and your interview. And so once again, you may want to relook at your interview and maybe jazz it up a little bit. But you can use the same premise, same thoughts or topics or substance, and just maybe add more to it. Make sure you're answering all the questions completely, even if they're multifaceted. That would be my suggestion.
All right, Jordan again. Are the meetings, check-in appointments, room checks with your RA submitted to a supervisor, or is it done differently per RA? Yeah, so pretty much anything the RA is doing is, they are directly reporting to the graduate coordinator or the coordinator of that community. So things like your intentional conversations, if your RA has come and had one with you, they're not logging every single detail of those conversations. I don't want it to make it sound like they're sitting there with a notepad. They're just logging like, hey, on this day, I went and I sat down with Jordan. We talked about adjusting to college. Or things like room checks. So you will have health and safeties coming up later in the semester. So all of that information does go directly to their supervisor, along with incident reports and a bunch of other things. So the RA is not taking in all that information and sitting with it. They are referring everything up.
All right, thank you. And next we have Michaela Matthew. Are you guys able to work and or hold positions on campus while being an RA? So our RAs, they can have an outside, so work and holding a position are obviously two different things. You're encouraged, and we absolutely love people having leadership positions outside of the RA position. Our RAs are leaders on campus, so it's important that they have the ability to kind of branch out and have other experiences outside of that. So you for sure can have positions outside of campus. You also are able to have a second job outside of the RE position. It is limited to 10 hours a week, and that is with supervisory approval. So if you have a job right now, that's okay. You don't have to quit it because you're applying to the process. But if you are offered the position, just make sure to have that conversation very early with your supervisor. Make sure they're okay with it. And it's really just so we can make sure, if we know you have a second job and after your first semester as an RA, maybe your grades are slipping, and we can have that conversation of, is 2 jobs really the best idea for you right now? Do we need to prioritize one over the other? And kind of having those conversations. So it's really just so we can best support you, not so much that we can like micromanage. And the 10 hours is like an HR tax policy kind of thing. So yeah, but you can definitely hold outside leadership positions and another job.
Right, how many applicants are there, just for an idea of competition? I'm actually going to refer this back to Haley to answer real quickly.
Yeah, so we don't want to discourage anyone from applying to the RA position. It is definitely a pretty sought after position on campus. We do have a lot of applicants, and I will say we have a couple hundred, but we hire a few hundred throughout the year. So definitely don't let that be discouraging or make you feel like you may not get it. We will be inviting about 300 people to interview with us, and that's pretty consistent every year that we invite about 300 people to interview with us. So, yeah. All right, Tanner.
Okay, so Jordan again, besides housing and biweekly pay, is there any more additional benefits? I do assume that you mean like financial benefits. So outside of your housing being covered and your biweekly pay, there are no additional financial benefits. That being said, the position does offer many different benefits, just like any other student leadership position would. So that is gaining experience, being able to, put something really amazing on your resume, talking about that in future interviews. You're going to have some, student development in our training. You're going to learn a lot in training to be an RA that is going to help you past being an RA. So outside of those financial benefits, there are many benefits, but besides housing and biweekly pay, there are no additional financial benefits.
All right, and this next question is from Michaela Matthew, and just like Tanner did to me, I'm going to throw it right back to her because she actually has experience being an RA here at UCF specifically. So I would love if you answer that one.
Yeah. So when do you have free time? That's a great question. I want to say it's going to be often, but it's going to be very different times. So you are going to have weeks, as Haley's kind of talked about, where your responsibilities are a lot bigger. I think that your time management is really where this comes to play. I know that I was an RA who was pretty diligent of sectioning blocks out of my day, out of my week to get RA things done. That way I had larger blocks that were only solely towards my self-care, my free time, being able to do the things that you want to do for your own enjoyment. So I would say, obviously when you are on duty, you are on duty. That means you're in the office for those 4 hours and then past that on call. I wouldn't say that you don't have free time during that. I just want to note that you are responsible to that community during that time and do have to jump into those responsibilities at any point. With that said, at a certain point, you do go home, you do get to sleep. You are holding the office phone through that evening. So whether that is, relaxing, eating some dinner, and watching some TV, it may feel like free time even when you're on duty. So.
All right, and this next question is, how much do most RAs get paid? And are you able to work and maintain another job along with being an RA? Our weekly stipends range between $150 and $250. So it depends on which community you're in. So there are more expensive communities where you're in cash money that goes kind of in your pocket. That's a little bit less. And then the less expensive communities, you get a little bit more. So that's kind of how we try to make things a little bit more equitable between the different communities that we have on campus. So it'll range again between $150 to $250. And you, like I mentioned, absolutely can have another job. You just need to make sure that your supervisor is okay with it and that you're keeping up with all of your academic and RA responsibilities.
All right, so Brianna is asking, is there a separate room for RAs or do they get a 4-person room to themselves, depending on the community, of course? So unfortunately, you do not get to live in a 4-person room all by yourself. That would be nice. I will acknowledge that would be nice. The majority of our communities, you do have a separate room and you live alone in that room, often with a kitchen. There are some communities where you live with other residents or another RA. But across the board, the majority is that you are living in your own space. And then we have a few where you live with other residents or an RA.
All right, next question is from Jordan. You're doing great with these questions. Thank you. Are there any distinct differences between each community RA, freshman versus upper class, apartments versus shared dorms? Yes and no. I will say, and again, I think Tanner can probably add on to this. So Tanner, you're welcome to add on if you feel like there's anything else to be added. I will say most of the time our first time in college students are a little bit more open to communication. And so you have, better and more often interactions with those students. Sometimes you have to work a little bit harder to have those interactions with our upperclassmen. And that's often the same with apartments versus your shared rooms. Shared rooms, they're often there more. And also in the number of residents you have, that changes based on community as well. So it's not like every RA across all of our 155 RAs gets exactly 42 residents. It's definitely different per community that you're in. So like the main,
all those.
yeah, those would be the main ones that kind of come to mind first that are most distinctive.
Just asking if we were to have a roommate, would it be another RA or would it be our residents? So I just touched on this. There are some communities where you are rooming with another RA, and there are some communities where you do room with residents. Either way, you are going to have your own room, individual room to yourself.
All right, and Jordan asks, how do noise complaints work for RAs? I am hoping that you are asking how does an RA respond to a noise complaint, and how do you, and not how do you tell someone your RA has too loud of noise? So for an RA to be responding to a noise complaint is usually someone in the community will call the office, say, hey, it's 2 a.m. I have a big test tomorrow. I've got this room next to me that's just bumping. I just need some help to get them to quiet down. The RA then calls their duty partner. 2 RAs go and respond together. They'll door knock and make it very casual and just say, hey, we've got a noise complaint. Can you just keep it down? It's 2 a.m. We're within our more quiet hours now. And so start kind of winding down. Now, if that continues throughout the night, also, when an RA does this, they're also going to be writing an incident report so that we can keep track of, oh, this one room every single Wednesday, Thursday, Friday is having the same noise complaint. Maybe we need to escalate this and have them have a conversation with their community coordinator, or so on and so forth. Same thing if they don't listen within the same night, if a grad has to respond, or so on and so forth. We have an on-call duty structure that actually writes out specifically how you respond to each incident and what happens when people choose different choices when you do respond. So all RAs are trained on this and also have a copy of this handbook for when they do respond to any incident, not just noise complaints.
All right, so Destiny is asking, are there any interview questions that we should be prepared for? So this is a great question. I can talk a little bit about some kind of general things. I would also recommend that we are having another Q&A after interview offers are sent for some interview tips. That is done with additional RAs too, so they're able to kind of talk about their experiences as well. And then we also go through some different kind of things to focus on and more specific ways to answer interview questions. I would say just for now, maybe try and think about attending that session because we will go into some more specifics. But in terms of general topics, that's going to be crisis management, that's going to be creating and fostering relationships. A lot of our questions are going to be very multifaceted and they are going to ask for specifics. So think about some sometimes when this happened or sometimes when that happened that you're able to bring into the interview and talk about your experiences.
Definitely situational based questions are things to prepare for where you can bring up your own experiences for sure. All right, and I feel like we have an interview trend going. What do interviews look like / what questions are usually asked? Are there also any resources to prepare? So as Tanner mentioned, we're doing one final Q&A after interview invites have been sent. I think they're on October 27th, but I may be wrong. I'm watching Tanner's eyes move. And
I will go look.
Yeah, Tanner's looking. Okay, so she's going to confirm the date with me. Off the top of my head, I can't remember exactly. But we have one more Q&A that's going to be with current RAs, so they'll be able to just unfiltered tell you everything about how they felt about their interview process, how they prepared, what went well, what didn't go so well, and things like that. Definitely prepare for situational based questions, a time when I had to do this, a time when I had to do that, and then like Tanner mentioned, multifaceted questions. So we do provide all of the questions written out right in front of you. And I want to encourage everyone to take the time to read them. Even if you feel like you've answered the full question, we usually ask 2 or 3 questions within each question. So it's really important that you take the time to read those questions that are right in front of you to make sure that they're all accurate. think I answered. Let me reread your question and make sure I answered all parts of it.
While she's doing that, I did bring it up. The next Q&A for interview questions is going to be October 27th from 6 to 7 p.m. And that'll be in person. So look for our details on our social, and we'll send many emails to all of our applicants who did get an offer to accept an interview.
Right. And so what do interviews look like? Just very generally, what happens is we will let you know, you'll select your interview time, and we will say that you need to arrive at a minimum of 15 minutes early. We have a holding room where you will check in for the RAs, the RA interviews. We'll make sure everyone's there. And then we will, like first grade, elementary school style, in a single file line, walk over to a separate interview room where all of our interviewers will be set up at different tables, all within one room. And I myself or Tanner will be directing you to your specific table that you're interviewing at. You will have your interview, and then you'll be able to leave whenever you're finished. So that's kind of just the look of interviews. Again, we'll go into this much more thoroughly and more detailed at that other Q&A, and we suggest that you attend if offered an interview.
All right, Destiny asks, also when taking into account GPA, is it the semester's GPA or cumulative GPA when offered the position? It's your cumulative UCF GPA. That does tie into, I guess it would be your cumulative overall then, but it's going to be your cumulative GPA. We do pull that after we offer interviews or offer positions. Before we offer positions, we're going to pull that information. So if you've only been a student for a semester, it would technically be your semester's GPA. If you don't have a GPA yet, please feel free to put 0 on your application. I know that sounds weird. Just note that we asked that on the application, but we do personally with the registrar office pull that information before offering positions.
All right, and Jordan asks, in the living learning communities, how are these additional elements provided to the residents, like Neptune's resources concerning wellness plans and access to different health classes? Every living learning community that we have actually has a staff or faculty kind of advisor or lead for that community, or they have multiple, and they are actually in charge of providing those resources, putting all those things together. We actually have separate budgets within the department that living learning communities can utilize to do different events or different initiatives, but any of those kind of extra access to special health classes or wellness plans, those are done by the faculty member, and they do work very closely and in conjunction with the RA of that floor to make sure that that information is getting disseminated out correctly, and making sure that everyone on the floor has the correct resources, being reminded of deadlines via the RA, things like that. So they're very working in tandem on living learning communities between that RA and then also a staff member who is outside of the Department of Housing in an area related to whatever living learning community it is.
All right, so my question is it okay to have a side job where you provide a service from your room as an RA, like hair, nails, etc.? Unfortunately, it is against our community living guidelines to run a business within your room, and so that is included for all residents, including RAs.
All right. Can RAs serve consecutive semesters? Absolutely. You're actually hired onto a year-long contract from May to May. Some people ask about summer, so I'm not going to go too into depth about that until we answer those questions. But you're hired on a year-long contract, so not only will you be serving consecutive semesters, you're contracted to serve consecutive semesters. But when it comes to serving multiple years in a row, we do have tons of RAs who do that. It's very, very common. There is a rehire process that is vastly different from this hire process. So don't get discouraged by this process being a little bit daunting. We have a rehire process that's completely different and just for RAs who are wanting to return to the role.
All right, so Jordan asks, for LLCs, do these additional resources, principles get integrated into the events for your floor and building? I think that Haley touched on this a little bit, but yes, they do. So your lesson plans will look a little bit different from the rest of the RA's lessons plans. They do try and integrate the resources, the principles, the core of the LLC into many of the events. That being said, not all of them will. So there will be times when they do, but there will be times when they don't.
All right, so the next question, not exactly specific to the RA, but I'm pretty sure I know this answer. When do normal housing applications open for spring 2023? I'm assuming you mean to be moving on campus in spring 2023. That date has not yet been announced, but usually comes out in about November-ish, but that date has not been announced yet for sure.
Usually it's due in January, but like the first week of January. So Zachary has asked, I suppose that this is a prevalent question for current times. Do RAs stay during events such as hurricanes or closures? I had to go home to help family put up shelters, so that was my main issue. That's a great question. So RAs are not critical personnel. That is what we call them on campus. Those are the people who are allowed to be on campus during, like actively working during closures. Their priority is that they are a student going to school and doing all the things that, even the residents are doing, going home to take care of things like putting up shelters. That being said, RAs do have shifts, and those shifts would have to be switched. So RAs are technically still on call during a hurricane. They're not actively working in a on-call response. I know that sounds a little interesting to say. They're going to be holding a phone. As you may have seen, we do hold out on all of our kind of like lockouts and using the kitchen and getting into the mail center, things that the RA would normally be doing during that time. They're actually not going to be able to do that because there will be a hurricane. So kind of things like that. They will be still holding the phone. So you would still have to find a switch for those shifts. That being said, our staff is so understanding of the many, many stressors that hurricanes bring. I know that I personally worked as an RA during a hurricane and did find switches for my shifts. There are a lot of RAs who stay and was able to help me out. And I was even able to get home in times of helping my family, bunkering and all those kind of things. So it does depend on if you have shifts, what that looks like, if we go into ride out locations and stuff like that.
Yeah, so you would just switch your shift just like any other time. If a concert came up and it was on the same night that you had a duty shift and you didn't want to go, you would try to switch that duty shift with someone else, and it'd be the exact same process. This is what we're seeing now is slightly different than what we've done kind of in years past at hurricanes, which if you've been around for a minute, we do have ride out locations. And so that does change if we were to go into a ride out location, as all responses, all offices would be closed because there would be no people in the residence halls that either they're in their residence halls and they're staying there as their ride out location in some buildings, or we're moving to a ride out location on campus. So that is a little bit different in terms of a ride out location, but again, you would be able to go home if you were to need to evacuate.
I would like to also add that I think that one of the components of being an RA is to have that adaptability. Things change often and you're having to prepare for that. You're helping your residents understand, hey, go check out the housing social. They went through a hurricane prep kit and things like that. But that also means that our policies can change year to year. And so understanding that, how it is today during this one hurricane may also not be how it is next year during a very different hurricane. So
definitely, that's a really good point. Thank you, Tanner. All right, is applications for summer term a different application, or are fall/spring/summer terms expected under the contract? So as I mentioned, we do hire you from a May to May contract. So we are hiring you for 1 year. If you're offered a position, included in your offer letter will be a link to either ask to be exempt from summer or to put a preference on working summer. So we try to put preferences on those who are studying abroad, those who maybe need a surgery that they've been pushing off and not wanting to do during classes. Maybe they have an internship out of state, something of those sorts. We kind of go down the line in priority of those to be excused for summer. We do often let a lot of people be excused for summer, but again, it's not a guarantee. And so at the end of the day, our residents need RAs, and we hire RAs for 1 year. So if for any reason we can't excuse you, we do expect that you'll be an RA and work summer. And then if not, we would have to find another RA to come in and replace you at that time. And so we wouldn't be able to guarantee your position moving forward after that. I will say in the This is now my 4th year here at UCF, and every year we've been able to excuse the RAs who want to be excused for either all or at least part of the summer. So we've not had a major issue where people couldn't be accommodated for in their preference to be excused.
All right. Will the interview be general, or are you picked for a specific location/community? I think that what you mean by this is, are you interviewed based on a location and community? So the interview is the same across the board. So all 300 some applicants that we have at interviews will have the same interview. That's for our equitability and our process, and we ensure that it is similar across the board. If you are speaking in terms of like location and community is determined after your interview. It isn't taken into account during your interview whatsoever. It would just be taken into account when you are placed into a community.
Yeah. All right, we are starting to catch up on these questions, so if you do have any questions at all, please feel free to go ahead and put them in the comments as we go ahead and answer these next few. All right, so this next question, do RAs get to plan the events that we host, or do we just host? For example, like a basketball tournament for the Fitness LLC. So it's funny because this is kind of two different questions. If you're the RA for an LLC, you will be planning most of your events either solo for the LLC or in tandem with the faculty or staff member who is kind of advising that floor. If you are an RA for a floor that's not an LLC, you plan those events. You can do it with other RAs in your community, but it is up to you to plan those events. So you plan them and you host them. They're a lot of fun.
Alrighty. Are shift times the same week to week, or do they change? I am trying to get into 2 clubs at this time, so I am worried about conflicting times. So that's a great question. I will say, unfortunately, every community does this a little differently. Sometimes a community has, your weekday shift is Wednesday, and you work every Wednesday for the entire semester. I know that's how it was in my community. I always worked Tuesday shifts, and that's how it was for the entire semester. Then you reassess the next semester based on school classes. That being said, that's going to be a time where you are talking a lot with your fellow RAs. So if you are in a community where you are picking your weekday shifts in a different fashion than you just have them once a week for the entire semester, that would be not picking those days. Say maybe you have club meetings on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. That's working a Sunday, Monday, or a Thursday weekday shift. That would be also if you are getting selected to pick or getting picked for one of those days, or you're stuck with one of those days, working with your coworkers, your other RAs, helping get switches, find those times where you're able to, meet the commitments of those clubs. It's definitely a lot to juggle sometimes. You're going to have to, work through those conflicts. I think, me personally, I was a resident assistant job, 10 to 15 hours a week. My final year, I was an RA. I was the chair of a committee. I was a research assistant and a teaching assistant. So you can do it all. And trust me, it looks great on that resume. And so do those things now. Do those things when you're applying to grad school and all of those kind of things. Get involved, because that is what we love to see in our RAs. Because when you're involved, you're going to encourage your residents to get involved. And that's one of the big components of being an RA. So communicating often with your supervisor and your fellow RAs about your commitments is just super important.
All right, and this next question from Destiny is very similar. If I were to have the weekday shift and I had a school engagement like band practice from 5:30 to 7:30, what would that look like? Should we get someone to switch the shift with us? So like Tanner said, no matter what, if it's weekly or if you have a few shifts per month or so, you pick those shifts. So at the end of the day, if you know you have band practice every Tuesday from 5:30 to 7:30, don't pick Tuesday as your duty shifts. If you're in the marching knights band and you have to be at every football game, don't take a weekend duty on a home football game, right? So we try to work with our staff as much as possible, but at the end of the day, it's up to your scheduling and your time management. So you'll get to pick your duty shifts. We do Most of the time we do it all at once. Sometimes we do the first half of the semester, then the next half. We leave that up to the community to decide, but you pick your days. So it's always up to you to decide when you want to be on duty. You just have a required number by your supervisor.
Would being area council make you more likely to be hired as an RA? As much as we would love to say yes, it doesn't. We love to see involvement in area council. Haley and I are a little biased there as we also co-advise our Residence Hall Association and National Residence Hall honorary, but it does not give you a one-up to get hired as an RA. It does give you a lot of experience within your community. It gets you connected with your RAs. It gets you understanding how housing works, which I do think is a benefit when you are interviewing. Oftentimes we hear a lot of pro staff who go through our interviews talking about how, this applicant didn't really understand the RA role or didn't really understand housing. And, while you're not expected to know every single detail of how the RA position works and what housing is and how it functions and its all of those things, you are not required to do that. That being said, having an understanding of, what a lockout is or, certain tasks an RA is doing, you're going to be able to make those connections within your interview, which is going to benefit you. Go ahead, Amy.
In most communities, I was going to just add that you also usually have an RA liaison who works directly with the area council. And so kind of with that, and then with everything Tanner said, you can't get much closer to understanding what an RA does than being on area council. That's going to give you your most face-to-face time with RAs and seeing them on the job in action, usually weekly or at your events or so on and so forth. So that's really going to help you. You also are advised by either a coordinator or a grad or both. And those are the same individuals who supervise RAs. So you get a good relationship with them and you can ask them questions about being an RA. It just gives you more experience to learn about what an RA does, but there's no like extra 5 points for being on area council. All right, so again, I just want to reiterate to everyone, if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the comments. We are about 15-ish minutes left till we end, and we have finished all the submitted questions. So we do have questions that were pre-submitted that we can go back to. But if you have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and put them in the comments. So the next question is, who do we contact with application issues and questions? This is definitely really important because with Hurricane Ian that's coming, we don't expect any technical difficulties, of course, on our side. Our server is actually hosted elsewhere. So at no point should the application site go down, like knock on wood and everything. But that is why we have extended the deadline by a day. And at this time, we don't plan to extend it anymore. So please keep that in mind. But should things change and should we be experiencing longer power outages, we can make changes from there. But if you have any questions, I highly suggest not emailing us at like 11 o'clock on October 2nd, but you can email us at reslifeselection@ucf.edu if you have any questions. I, again, highly suggest we're going to be trying to watch this email as much as possible. But again, with a hurricane coming, we kind of don't exactly know what it's going to look like until it's looking like it,
All right, so Jordan has asked for area council. Do you know when and how often they usually meet? So not necessarily an RA selection question, but as we do advise our area councils and RHA, they do meet on Tuesdays every other week, not this week, but next Tuesday. That being said, you can follow RHA on social media at RHA at UCFRHA.
I'll have to look at UCF, and then I think NRHH is UCFRHA. I'll pull it up and I'll put it on a banner.
They use their social media a lot to communicate and reaching out to our elections have already finished, so reaching out to the area council president is someone you can do. And yeah, good question.
I'm putting the two social medias up. 1 second.
Okay. I'm going to go on. I won't be able to pull this question up on the screen, but we'll do that in a second. I'm going to go on and ask the next question. If I have a full-time internship in the summer, will there be a guaranteed exception for temporary exempt or at least shorten the hours required? So that is a really good question. Kind of going back to our summer preference, an internship is going to be pretty high up there on the things we're going to try and get people exempt for. So your summer exemption is going to be a long form where you list what your preference is, why your preference is. You use a Likert scale and scale how how likely you are to need the job and things like that. So we ask a lot of questions there because we do ultimately have to make some difficult decisions. Having a full-time internship during the summer that benefits you for your future. It's often related to your classes. Those kind of things are going to be becoming top priority. Aside from need for home and need for time off. So we are going to take that into account. That being said, it can't be a guarantee. You are when accepting the position, accepting that you are an RA from May 2023 to May 2024. So if you aren't able to uphold those hours and stay for the summer, you would be resigning from the position.
Yeah, and we don't shorten hours. So you will always be contracted at the same amount of hours no matter what, unless you're taking time away or exempt for summer. So that second part isn't really an option, but definitely being exempt, completely exempt for summer would be an option. All right, and Destiny asked, so just to clarify, the interview is going to be one-on-one or is it going to be a panel of interviewers? It's actually 2-on-1. So it would look very similar to how you all are sitting on your computer screen, but in real life. So it would be 2 housing staff members, so look like me and Tanner sitting on one side of the table, and then you would be sitting on the other table. So a 2-on-1 interview.
Except it's unlikely to actually be Haley or I, as we're entire processing, our entire amazing housing and residence staff, all of our graduate coordinators, our full-time office assistants, assistant directors, and coordinators are all going to be the ones who are conducting interviews.
All right, here's another one that has been submitted to us.
So what is your biggest advice for someone going through the RA selection process? I hate that the first thing that came to my mind was trust the process, because nobody likes to sit around and wait. Unfortunately, there are going to be a lot of times where you are sitting around and waiting. There are a lot of times when your communication from us is limited. So you're starting your application now. It's getting submitted October 2nd, 11:59 p.m. Remember that date. We're going to go through an application review process where we review up to 600 applications. So it's quite a bit of time before that and that October 24th date, where we're sending you an interview notification. You're accepting an interview and then you're interviewing early November. That being said, you could not hear from us again for another month. And then after that, if you are placed in our alternate pool and not selected for a spring hire position, which as a reminder, we did say that we do only hire about 10 to 15 people in the spring. So it is a large majority of our applicants. You wouldn't be hearing from us again until February 14th. So there are going to be a lot of times where you are in the process, but not actively in the process. You are kind of in that waiting room. And so I would just say get involved, be active in your community, be active in the UCF community, and be patient with the process. Just try and do your best.
All right, so this question is, what is the time range for shifts? I am assuming you mean duty shifts that the RAs participate in. So it's different if you're doing a duty shift on a weekday or a weekend. A weekday duty shift goes, excuse me, I'm going to misspeak and confuse people. Weekday shifts include shifts on Sunday through Thursday. So even though Sunday is a weekend, it's going into the week. So we consider that a weekday shift. And then weekend shifts are Friday and Saturdays. So the time ranges for weekday shifts start at 4:45. So that's you in the office picking up the phone and hanging out in the office until 8 p.m. So 4:45 p.m. until 8 p.m. At 8 p.m., you will take the phone with you, or your duty partner will. You guys switch off. and you will be able to go back to your room from 8 p.m. until 8 a.m. And that's on a weekday duty shift. At that point at 8 a.m., you bring the phone back. There's a full-time office assistant sitting in the office waiting for that phone, and you give it back to them. On a weekend shift, it's very similar at the beginning. You come in at 4:45, you pick up the phone, you hold the phone until 8 p.m., and then you go back to your room at 8 p.m. But instead of coming back at 8 a.m., you're not going to come back until 4:45 when the next group of RAs are coming in to start their duty shift. And again, there are 2 weekend shifts, and then you go back to weekday shifts. But you don't do those 2 weekends like back to back, unless for some reason you chose that upon yourself. But again, that's up to you as a choice.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I actually do believe that our weekend shifts are fully in on call. So we don't sit in the office for those 4 hours. It has changed many times, and then COVID was very different. So that is the thought process. Haley is thinking back to different times. So, but just wanted to clarify that the weekend, so that's that Friday and Saturday, you are fully on call for 24 hours.
Thanks, Tanner. You're right. With that, you get to answer another duty question.
What types of duties are done during your time in the office? Great question. So that can be lockouts. A resident comes into the office, is locked out of their room, is locked out of their bathroom, and depending on the community. That can be work orders. So maybe a resident comes in, maybe they call in and they say that their toilet isn't working. Often we recommend that residents are putting in work orders, but those major issues that you're sometimes going to put in, that's also like true for like things that are just kind of community wide or not assigned to a resident, say it's a hallway light or things like that. And then, you're also doing rounds. So twice, actually once or twice in the evening, you are walking every floor of every building to ensure the safety. And, you're checking for those work order things, or checking to make sure the lights are working, the elevator's working, those kind of things. And then you're also just making sure there aren't residents who are locked out without a phone, don't remember where the office is. We're kind of running into those kind of things often too. There are going to be particular times in the year where you're going to be given tasks to complete. Maybe that's vacancy checks that you're doing during your office hours or your times in the office and stuff like that. Again, there's going to be additional responsibilities as needed, but those are kind of like the gist.
All right, and Destiny asks, how often do we interact with more than one other RA? I hope a lot. That's the goal. So you'll have a weekly staff meeting where your entire staff will get together. Now we have staffs of 8 people, and we have staffs of, Tanner, what's the Libra? 24? Yeah, okay. Yeah, so that's a big difference between a staff of only 8 others, or not 8 others, 8 including yourself, and 24 including yourself. So 1, we hope you're interacting with them like all the time. 2, you are always responding with someone else, usually just one other duty partner when you go for incidences. Most of your on-call or duty shifts will be with more than one other RA. Usually there's like 2, 3, 4 in the office for a duty shift, depending on the size of the community. I always bring up, I brought this up on the last Q&A, so I'm kind of getting repetitive. It was like 2 days before door decks were due, and I think we were working late because of a Q&A, and I walked into the Nike office, and there were RAs on the tables, on the chairs, laying on the floor, all trying to do their door decks all together. It was very cute. And so that's not like you must be sitting in the office from this time to this time to work on your door decks. It was they all wanted to come together. They had a couple skilled door deck makers that were helping other people make door decks. And they just took it upon themselves to kind of all get together. And that is very common to do bigger groups of get-togethers on working on RA things or just hanging out and socializing. So I hope that you interact with other RAs very, very often in the position.
A lot of the staffs too also have staff development committees. So that is a group of RAs who are responsible for developing their community of RAs. So I know I can think of a few different events. That's a game night for the RAs. That's one event I had is after a staff meeting, we went out and we made s'mores on one of the grills in the community. So there are going to be those things. If there's not a community in your community, make one or make an unofficial one. Use GroupMe to communicate with them, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we have a couple minutes left, so if you have any last minute ones, go ahead and throw them in the comments before we sign off. But there's your next one, Tanner.
Last question. This might have already been answered, but is there training? Great question. Yes, so we actually have a pretty lengthy training. Our training takes place twice a year. So depending on when you're hired, the majority of our applicants are hired for that May 2023 start. And so we have a week-long training in the beginning of May 2023. Well, every year actually, in May. That week long is going to be pretty much 8 to 5 every day. You are in a training session. That's going to be a bunch of different sessions. You're hearing from campus partners. You're learning policies and procedures. You're going through what we call behind closed doors. So that is, scenario, other RAs are acting out a scenario and you are going through the process of how you would respond to that. It's going to be lengthy, and that's because RAs are held to a pretty high standard, and they do a lot within their communities and supporting their residents to ensure safety and well-being and things like that. And so you are going to be trained, and it is going to be very in-depth.
All right, I'll give like 30 more seconds for any very last minute questions. But if not, thank you all for joining us. I just want to remind everyone that the application, we did have one more. Before you guys log off, just wanted to thank you for taking time to answer questions today. You made a lot of things more clear for me. Thanks, Jordan. You're so very welcome. So anyway, I have our old question on here. So anyway, thank you all so very much for joining us today. If you have any questions, you're welcome to email us at reslifeselection@ucf.edu. Don't forget the new application deadline is October 2nd at 11:59. Thank you all.